Our distinguished guests on the dais and in the auditorium, and dear participants of this seminar, good morning. If you were to turn the pages of history for the last, India's history for the last 1,000 years, it will become quite evident that we had paid very little attention to our seas. We were pretty occupied with what was happening on our land borders, and of course there were certain threats emanating from there. Because of that, we opened up this vulnerability of our nation to the seas, from the seas. And, various nations like Portugal, France, Britain, and Netherlands, which are smaller in size than some of our states of the present India, in both in size and population, they got the foothold into our country, and we were colonized for over 200 years. We are still grappling with the after effects of this colonization 70 years into our independence. So the importance of the seas to India is extremely important, and it cannot be overemphasized. So therefore, when the Vice Chancellor called me up on Friday and said, would you like to be a part of this Congress, I readily accepted. I think this Second World Ocean Science Congress, which is basically organized by the Vigyan Bharati or Vibha, and in this hallowed precincts of Andhra University, is a very, very noble gesture. And we need to get maritime thinking into our country, and this is one of the seminars that will help us do so, and also help all the stakeholders get together and talk about the maritime consciousness amongst our population. I thought I'll pick a small topic, and in the next 10 minutes, I thought I'll delve into the maritime attributes of India. What are the attributes that make India a maritime nation? I just want to pick on 3-4 of them, and then leave certain food for thought for the Congress to deliberate on in the next 3 days. First, if you put the next slide. If you look, we are normally used to seeing India, or the map of India, something like this, and the oceans around it, something like this. But if I were to turn this upside down, and which is a legitimate way of looking at India from the south, or south up, you will realize, and it will automatically hit you, or maybe change your perception of the fact that India is truly a maritime nation. Because we have unhindered access to the seas. And if you look at the north, we have the Himalayas, which are impregnable for any interaction, trade, or commerce, or anything. So we must look at India as a maritime nation. And this is perhaps the reason why we are the only country in the world that have an ocean named after it. With this perspective in the background, I'll cover a few maritime attributes of this country, of our country. The first is the maritime geography. The maritime geography has been very, very kind to us. We are endowed with a long coastline, island territories, a seafaring population. And all these were used, and since Indus Valley civilization, and all these attributes encouraged maritime activity along the coast and to other countries. If you look at the artifacts and archaeological findings, we know that from this very coast, ships had gone out to various countries in the Southeast Asia, the east coast of Africa, and which for trade transferred our culture and various other important facets of our Indian society to far off distant lands. Long before the Romans learnt what monsoons were, our seafarers were using monsoon winds to move from India to West Asia, to the west coast, east coast of Africa, and Southeast Asia. In fact, monsoon stems from the Indian word mausam. The Matsya Yantra, which is a forerunner for the magnetic compass, was invented here in India. We had very strong kingdoms, starting from the Emperor Ashok, the Kalingas, Cholas, and Pandyas, who transferred or shifted our flourishing Indian settlements to Malay, Indonesia, Cambodia, Fiji, etc. Whenever we go across to Southeast Asia, you find remnants of Indian culture all over. But basically what I'm trying to get at, the maritime linkages and trade were the primary drivers of India's prosperity in the seas those days. This was, of course, eclipsed by events on land, as I've told you earlier, and history. It's been consigned to history thereafter. Coming back to the present, nothing has changed with regard to maritime geography. We are still there where we are. We have the Indian Ocean region, and this Indian Ocean region has emerged as the center of global trade. We all know that the Persian Gulf has the world's the largest producer of oil, and the entire oil flow, which goes to various countries, passes through the Indian Ocean region. In addition, a vast majority of trade passes through the Indian Ocean, and if you see this slide, these green points indicate merchant ships that are plying in our area, just next to the coast of India. At any given time, this is a grab. So you can appreciate what kind of trade is passing through. So nothing has changed. We are sitting astride this. It is like having an industry next to a global highway. We are like that. So we must seize this as a very important facet. Maritime geography has gifted us. This brings me to the second attribute, which is our dependence of our economy on maritime trade. 90% of our trade by volume and 77% of our trade by value passes through the is through the seas. We are, really dependent on trade from the seas, and we are an petroleum or oil importing nation. We are highly dependent on oil, and by next year, nearly 85% of our oil and energy needs will be coming from the seas. So this makes the seas extremely important to us, and that's why I would like to reiterate again that we are a maritime nation. The third attribute, you can put the slide, is our exclusive economic zone, or the EEZ, which extends 200 nautical miles from our coastline. This EEZ is about 2.01 million square kilometers. It's about 2/3 our Indian landmass, and it is endowed with riches. Minerals, oil, gas, fish, they're all available there for the picking, and these are ours. But sadly, you'll realize, let's take fishing industry for instance, we've hardly seen the tip of the iceberg. Even though we have a 1.5 million fishermen, and our fisheries stock, or the annual catch, is about 3.5 million tons per year, but we have barely scratched the surface. The current methods of fishing that we use are primitive, inefficient, and most importantly, environmentally not sustainable. The kind of fishing that is going on in Park Bay has completely demolished the seabed. So it's too little and is not being done too well. In fact, on the lighter note, there is a saying, it's only in the Indian seas around the world that fish die of old age. Everywhere else they are caught. So this is a challenge which is in front of us. With regards to EEZ, if you see, all the areas on land have already been exploited. It is the seas that are available to us. Therefore, all the big countries of the world are looking to the seas. Large growing economies are looking to the seas to garner resource security. We have numerous claims, and recently now the continental shelf claims have come into being, which are beyond the 200 nautical mile EEZ that I spoke about, and there is therefore a great potential for competition and conflict that it originates. With regard to India, we have resolved all the maritime delineation with all countries except Pakistan. And but when we do our claims for continental shelf, next slide, we find that there is a fair overlap in our continental shelf, especially in relation to Sri Lanka. There is a Sri Lankan claim, and Myanmar's claim, and ours. So there is an overlap, and this can cause a little bit of problem in the coming years. Another emerging trend that we find is, whilst we have a lot of wealth in the EEZ, there is also a lot of wealth in the high seas, in the deep seas. And India has got a pioneer status as far as harnessing these mineral wealth is concerned. We've been allocated pioneer investor status, and we've been given 2 blocks which we are entitled to survey. But the problem is that we haven't done anything about it as yet. We don't have the technology to go down to those depths and resource or mine the polymetallic nodules and polymetallic sulfides. China, on the other hand, has moved very quickly on this, and they're the world leaders in this investing in this research and actual exploration. We find, I'm watching the seas on a daily basis, we find many Chinese research vessels already there in their areas, designated areas, and looking for new areas to mine these. They consider it the future gold rush. And if that is not done by us, we've got the pioneer status, but if we don't exploit it, we are going to be the losers. Fourth and the last maritime attribute that I want to bring out is about ports, the merchant marine, and our shipbuilding industry. You know, nature has given us a long serrated coastline. We have 200 natural harbors, but we have only 12 major ports. So there's a long way to go in this. If we get our ports, the handling quicker, and exploit this, we'll be much better off. The Sagarmala project, which is a port-led development project, is going to help us in this regard. As far as Indian flag merchant ships is concerned, various successive economic surveys in the years have identified the urgent need for India to enhance and upgrade its merchant fleet. Today, only 10% of our trade is carried in ships which are Indian. Only 10% of Indian flag ships are built in Indian shipyards. So, having spoken about all these maritime attributes, I would like to draw your attention that we have to sit down as all stakeholders. It's a very complex area, and we all need to sit down together and brainstorm on various issues and find mitigating strategies to the challenges that these challenges and opportunities that are presented by the fact that India is a maritime nation. So I have flagged a few which I would recommend that you could discuss in the Congress. The first one is, how do we modernize our fishing fleet, and what fishing techniques do we use to make sure that they are environmentally safe? The second is to develop modern technologies for exploiting the seabed resources, as I've told you, in our designated EEZ and in the mining areas that have been allotted to us by the International Seabed Authority. This is the next new gold rush, and we need to take the early bird advantage. Next point is to enhance ports, merchant fleet, and shipbuilding. I've already covered this. And the last one, the fourth, is extremely important, and I recommend it for discussion amongst the others, and that is how to develop a national maritime consciousness. Many centuries back, India had a maritime outlook, which has unfortunately faded over time. For the academicians in the audience, you may like to deliberate on how to build this consciousness, possibly from ab initio stage in our education process. Lastly, this brings me to the end of my talk, and lastly, I would like to just show you a slide. I'll quote from a publication, which is the Maritime History of India, and it says, "Awareness of our rich maritime heritage from ancient times, our ascendancy amongst seafaring nations, our acme of achievements before the advent of the Europeans, then our decadence and our decline in maritime affairs in the 17th century, all these requires to be studied, analyzed, and lessons drawn so that history does not repeat itself." I leave you with these thoughts. I once again thank the organizers for inviting me to this event. The initiative taken by Andhra University and VIBA are truly commendable. I wish the participants of the second World Ocean Science Congress the very best. Jai Hind.